Well, happy Palm Sunday. And we will just see what we can get into today. The little booklet that we've been working with over this Lenten season that Louise Thomas was nice enough to secure for us, called Fasting and Feasting. Almost every time Reverend Claudia comes in, she and I'll agree that the one from today is really, really good. And this one is good again. Martha Smock is the writer of these particular pieces for the Sundays. And this one is entitled, You Are Unfettered, Unbound, Triumphant, Glorious, Free. How does that sound? So I'm going to say it as an affirmation and then we'll repeat it together. I am unfettered, unbound, triumphant, glorious, free. Here we go. I am unfettered, unbound, triumphant, glorious, free. And here's what she says. Do you feel bound by what you've been, bound by the past, bound by your lacks, bound by the picture you've created of yourself in your own mind and in the minds of others? I've been there. The beginning of your freedom lies in your own mind, and that's exciting, a basic unity teaching. When you let go of limiting and binding thoughts, you find that conditions, persons, or circumstances no longer have power over you. A great teaching of Emily Cady in Lessons in Truth. Something in you knows that you're greater than anything that you've experienced or expressed. When Jesus looks on you or me, this is not in the scripture here, this is from me. When Jesus looks on you and me, what does he see? He sees us unbound, unfettered, untethered, and free. He sees us as we truly are. So what this piece is really calling to our attention is just be who you really are and let go of who you're not. She finishes this way. This inner knowing, this feeling of potential greatness is the Spirit of God in you trying to break through. It is like the sunlight that may be temporarily hidden behind clouds, much like this morning. But the clouds cannot take away the light. Nothing can erase or lessen the bright, glorious, wonderful spirit that is in you. Isn't that a beautiful piece? And she ends this particular portion of it by saying, realizing that you're essentially a spiritual being, you're able to step forth to be the self God created you to be. And of course, that was Jesus' message on Palm Sunday, on the occasion of the crucifixion and on the occasion of the resurrection, that we are these divine beings. One of the things that A Course in Miracles has done for me is clarify much of what's in the Bible. And here, Jesus is speaking on Palm Sunday. This is Palm Sunday, the celebration of victory and the acceptance of the truth. Let us not spend this holy week brooding on the crucifixion of God's Son, but happily in the celebration of his release. Now, we know that throughout the last 2,000 years, there's been a lot of brooding over the crucifixion of Jesus, right? And yet, what we're establishing in this three-part series, I hope, is that we need to see all of those events in a different way if we're to truly wrest from them all the good that the message of Easter has for us. So he goes on to say, for Easter is the sign of peace, not pain. A slain Christ has no meaning, but a risen Christ becomes the symbol of the Son of God's forgiveness on himself, the sign he looks upon himself as healed and whole. This week begins with palms, and palms, as I mentioned in a little bit of commentary on today's lesson, palms represent strength. And it was the palm branches, of course, that were laid down on Jesus' path or waved by the crowd there in Jerusalem as he entered the city. Now, there was a little different thing going on in the minds of most of those people. They thought that Jesus was going to establish himself as an earthly king. And of course, was not what he intended. He had a message and a meaning that was much more powerful than anything they could have conceived of, that not only blessed them, although they didn't always see it, but has blessed us for the last 2,000 years and will continue to. And that's really the focus of this journey to the resurrection that we're looking at last Sunday, today, and on Easter Sunday. And as part of that, the Good Friday service this coming Friday. So the week begins with palms and ends with lilies, the white and holy sign, the Son of God is innocent. And Barbara, I'm so grateful for these lilies. I know you are just spot on every time. I saw some in the other church that I was visiting this past week in Austin, and I thought, gosh, we sure do need lilies, and here they are. So thank you. Let no dark sign of crucifixion intervene between the journey and its purpose, between the acceptance of the truth and its expression. This week, we celebrate life, not death. And so, the message of Palm Sunday is indeed about hope, and it is indeed about strength. And today, I'd like for us to focus on how we more readily access that strength of spirit. How many know the name Reverend Jim Roseberg? A beautiful, beautiful Unity minister and his wonderful wife Nancy, and they have done tremendous work in this movement for probably 40 years, I don't know, 35 or 40 years, a long time. He's written many books, and the Rosebergis are actually thinking of retiring, planning to retire in this part of our world, and they hope to be part of our church. And I think what a wonderful, wonderful gift from Spirit. They have much to teach us, and we will learn, I'm sure, all that's there for us. And in the meantime, a beautiful piece from Jim Roseberg's book, The Transcendent Life, Understanding the Nature of True Power. He reminds us that when Jesus, and he didn't use these words in this particular book, but it reminds us that when Jesus humbled himself, as he did when he entered the city, he could have called for a big white statue, right? Before he had strolled in and declared himself as king and gone from there. And if anybody tried to do anything, he could have just called the angels and smite them. What am I going to do? You know, I was smited by the angels. And but that wasn't him, was it? And so he came in on the donkey, and I'd like for us to see that as a metaphor for humility. What happens when we're humble? A few days before that entry into Jerusalem, Jesus said, "He who exalts himself shall be humbled, and he who is humble shall be exalted." And Jesus taught that also in the Beatitude, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Jim Roseberg sort of latched on to this idea of the power of humility. He says, "There is power in us, there is compassion and love resting in our hearts that is beyond words. There is wisdom and creativity that will shock and enliven us and transform the world." The question is, how are the power, love, compassion, and wisdom unleashed? And he is, I think, bold in this beautiful work to say, it is unleashed by the power, the principle of humility. So let me ask you to close your eyes for just a moment and revisit that experience from the meditation, whatever it might have been for you. And I realize some of us are more visual and some of us more kinesthetic. Some pick up on experiences like that in different ways. But whether it's a vision that you saw clearly or a feeling that you felt in your heart, or both, allow yourself for a moment to revisit that moment when Jesus the Christ, the master teacher, the miracle worker, the lover of all that is, looked into your eyes, how that might have looked or how that felt. And just be in that for a moment, feeling humbled by that masterful gaze, by his love for you. And allow yourself to think or feel his humility, because you have loved him. You have opened your heart to him. And just allow yourself for a moment to breathe that authentic power and truth into your being. And when you're ready, just open your beautiful eyes. Reverend Rosemary says, humility is the master key that is given to the human family. However, the humble life remains one of the least understood ideals to which we can aspire. It seems to make little sense that people we see that appear to be the most successful are certainly not humble. In fact, many speak highly of themselves and their abilities. How can powerlessness lead to the expression of love, of power? What a paradox it would be. Of course, in Miracles says, in my defenselessness, my safety lies. And I want to share one quick story with you that Reverend Rosemary begins chapter 1 with in this book. He calls it Power Released. As a youngster, I felt the power that is at the heart of the humble life. A good friend and I were playing in a housing project under construction in Gretna, Louisiana. Large, deep holes had been dug, and because of the level of the groundwater, the holes had filled with water. My friend Stan slipped into one of the pits. At first, I laughed as he struggled to crawl out, but then I noticed the slippery, black mud that formed the sides of the hole did not allow him to obtain a handhold. He panicked, and while clawing at the muddy bank, he rose and sank several times in the murky water. Stan was in danger of drowning. Without thinking and without regard for my own safety, I slid into the hole and perched uneasily at the water's edge. As Stan surfaced, I reached out and grabbed him under his arms, and with a strength beyond a young boy's, lifted him straight out of the water and pulled him over me to safety. I did not realize at the time, but I had felt the touch of the divine and tapped a wellspring of its power. When we give ourselves to this basic understanding, when we give ourselves to this teaching that in our defenselessness our safety lies, when we allow ourselves to let go of grievances, let go of anger, miracles happen. Miracles happen because we are acting from and with the authentic power that God has given us. And that power is always available to us. We don't have to import it. We don't have to buy it. We don't have to prevent it. It is who we are. And so this entry into Jerusalem, Jerusalem metaphysically means city of peace. And in the Bible, as you've been taught, I know, in Unity and in related studies, each of the characters in the Bible represents an aspect of our own consciousness. We like to identify with the good ones, like Jesus and David and different ones. And yet, those other pieces are there. But the real, true, authentic representation of who we are is represented in the model of Jesus. And so, Jesus entering into Jerusalem is, for us, if we choose to see it this way, a metaphor for that which is the divine, moving into the Jerusalem, which is our state of consciousness that is peace. When we allow that beautiful being that Jesus represents to remind us of who we are, we open ourselves to an experience of deep and abiding peace. And our life reflects it. I know our board is aware that I got called on this past week to make a kind of a quick trip to Austin, Texas, to visit a family there that had lost a loved one who had lived a full life. Kate Seeley, I talked about briefly last Sunday, 96, a few months shy of 97, a World War II veteran, an amazing being, an artist, a great mother, a wonderful wife, a dear friend, someone that I'd known along with Mary for about 13, 14 years. And I was asked to come to Austin and officiate the service. It involved an early morning trip on Wednesday morning down to the airport from Bolen. That's about an hour. There was very little traffic at 4 in the morning. Any other time, 2 hours. But I got to the airport at about 5 o'clock, and along with a lot of other sleepy people, and was making my way through the security line and found myself in front of the TSA agent who took my license and my boarding pass and scanned it. And as I looked up at this individual who was, like most of us, maybe not fully awake, she had a button on. And that button said very simply, and it wasn't a finished thing, it was just sort of a homemade button. It said, "You are beautiful. You are beautiful." And I thought to myself, and I was not about to let the moment pass, and I looked at her and I said, "And you are beautiful." And she took it in, and I took it in. And it was what we call, in A Course in Miracles language, a holy instant. And I thought, what a way to start my day, to make this trip to Austin, to officiate the service for a lady whose life was very beautiful, and who made it a point to say that to people in different ways, sometimes with her jokes, sometimes with her stories, with her artwork, with all the ways that she blessed that community and many others in her 96 years. And the interesting thing is that Kate worked this transition out in such a way that I could also be there to do a christening the next night for a child that was barely 6 weeks old. And so it was a paradox of sorts with sending life off and celebrating life in a new way and welcoming this loved one in. And what a beautiful prequel to Holy Week, when we talk about innocence and wholeness and the unreality of death. So having heard that and reflecting just a little bit on that particular piece, my question to you today is, what will you encounter in this Holy Week that will remind you of how beautiful you are? And that will give you the opportunity to affirm that beauty in someone else. It may be a phone call, it may be a letter, it may be just a smile or a handshake or a hug. But it will make the Holy Week experience for each of us holy indeed. So let's close with a prayer. Loving God, thank you for a life well lived. Thank you for new birth, much like what our beautiful friends Devison and Stevie are experiencing. Thank you for this spiritual community and this Holy Week. A wonderful reminder of how loved we are, of how this master teacher came into our experience not only to enrich the lives of those around him, to heal the sick and raise the dead, but to teach us such a powerful lesson as he did in the resurrection, to remind us of our own opportunities for finding that resurrecting spirit within ourselves as we humble ourselves before you and all that you've created. And we allow that humility to be expressed in our lives in ways that are palpable and true. Saying something kind, seeing something kind, responding to perhaps an angry word with a soft answer, allowing ourselves to deepen in the spirit of your love, to let go of the thorns that Jesus referred to and embrace the lilies that represent our innocence and the innocence of all of our sisters and brothers. We allow ourselves to embrace, if you will, the idea of this holy homework or this holy week, so that we might find ourselves on Good Friday evening coming together in a spirit of celebration for the love that is, a love that Jesus represents and taught us so beautifully and powerfully. And coming together next Easter morning to celebrate not only the resurrection that he demonstrated for us, but the resurrection of your spirit in our own lives in a stronger, more poignant, more powerful way as we humbly set aside our littleness to joyfully embrace all that we are. And in the energy of that love, we pray.